Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to our first Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday for the month of June. Kind of took most of May off. It was a little bit of an on the road and recovering from NAB month, but good to be back. Today, we're going to a different end of the facility. We've talked about mics, we've talked about transmitters, we've talked about sites, we've talked about studios, but we haven't really spent a lot of time on that big steel thing that makes everything talk to everybody. So we're going up the tower a little bit today. Now, anybody who knows me knows that what I know about towers, you could fit on the head of a very small pin. So I brought in some folks that know more than me, which is usually the way we try to work this stuff. Want to welcome first the principal of Peter Eckmann Broadcast Consultants, Mr. Peter Eckmann. Pete, thanks very much for being here with us today.
Okay, there I am.
And
You're
there you
welcome.
are. And we've got Todd Loney, Broadcast Sales Manager for RFS. Todd, thanks very much for being here as well.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
And so I want to just give both y'all a special thanks. I had another guest lined up, and I'm not sure whether it was the talking to people or just a conflict. Funny thing about tower climbers is y'all are busy these days. It's getting harder and harder to find them. So I guess that's a good thing. It beats the heck out of being bored, but it does make it a little harder to find somebody that can free up a little time in the middle of the day. So I really appreciate y'all coming with us today.
Glad to.
Yeah,
All
you're
right,
welcome.
now we do have a bunch of advanced questions, but before we get rolling, we're going to hit the mandatory housekeeping stuff. Anybody who's watching and has seen one of our webinars before knows that you do have the ability to, we try to make it as interactive as we can. Ask questions, comments, criticisms, concerns. As long as you don't get too sarcastic about it, I'm more than happy to pick it up and address it as we go or wherever we find a good spot. If you're not shy and you've got a microphone, you got the little hand wavy icon on your control panel. You click on that and it'll light up a little alarm on my screen, and we'll bring you into the conversation if we can. If you're an SBE member, remember the completion of a Nautel webinar does qualify for half of a recertification credit under category I of the research schedule. So spreadsheet, notepad, whatever you scroll down your recertification points on, add this to the list. On that note, let's get rolling. And as I said, we did have a bunch of advanced questions, and most of them will get addressed. I have a printed copy here in front of me as well. Most of them will get addressed as we go. If we get along and it looks like we've hit a point where your question would fit and I haven't answered it, then shoot me a note in the questions to remind me, because there is a lot of stuff here. A lot of it's pretty, I guess, common sense is maybe the word, but I guess it's only really common sense if you know what question to ask. So one of the questions, and Todd, I'm going to throw this one at you, because as a rep with RFS, you work with tower crews all over the world, you know, not just any specific. And I know, Pete, you do too, but what do you do you have a list of crews that you would refer if somebody wanted to reach out and say, hey, I'm in such and such an area, is there a good crew around here?
Sure, yeah, we have quite a few that we work with very consistently and well. Usually 2 or 3 is what I give. I don't want to give out like I'm promoting somebody specifically, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same here. I mean, there's, depending on the job, if the customer tells me what kind of job and the complexities of the job, we can recommend the right crew for that kind of project.
Right, and that's a good point, because I know I've talked in the just doing a little of the research on this. I was talking to one crew and they said, no, we do painting. That's all we do. Another crew, Full Graph, I'll give them a little shout out here, but they do specifically tower lighting and electrical. So yeah, that's a really good point, Pete. Knowing the scope of work, what you want to accomplish, will go a long way toward figuring out what crew you need to have do it. Y'all had sent me a lot of pictures, and I'm going to throw Todd under the bus first, just because I can. But and under the bus isn't right. So these pictures go back a little bit, don't they, Todd? Tell me the story.
So this was in Houston, just outside of Houston. It's a 2,000-foot tower, and you can see things were a little more cavalier back then for safety. It was typically a tree climber harness that you used for safety, and the only time you used it was when you wanted both hands to work on something or to take a rest. Um, so, like the fellow there standing on the gym pole is jumping the pole right there, and or the track, and he's not tied to anything. The other guy down there hanging on the guy wire is putting the vibration dampeners on, and he's basically hanging off a rope on the wire. So
Yeah, and there's
yeah.
no question there have been a lot of changes over the years as, we've learned a little more about what constitutes, and I guess it's not that we didn't really think about safety so much back in the day. Well, I guess we kind of didn't as much anyway. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
Um, you did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, I guess he didn't think too much about it.
Yeah.
It you let go. I mean,
Yeah.
your
Oh,
hands are your safety. So
Yeah, the training was a little different. It was on the job training, and you learned a lot more about staying alive and hanging on and the way you worked. You always
yeah.
wrap your arms around something as you lean across something. You just you work differently than it is
Yeah.
currently.
Well, and I think that's maybe even part of it. As I said before, the tower crews seem to be a whole lot busier than they were back then. I mean, now 10, 12-hour days are a lot more common, and you want to be darn sure that you've got some mechanical aid when you start to get a little tired, I think. So, and again, remember, I'm the ground-based guy. So if I say something really stupid, don't be ashamed to just put me in my place because Lord knows my wife will do it uh, on that. So that was one of the first questions we got was about safety training and special requirements and training for staff crews. And so speaking of my wife, she'll be the first one. Anytime I ask a question, she'll tell me, Google is your friend. So that's where I went. And then I discovered that Nate, the National Association of Tower Erectors, did I get that right?
Yeah.
um,
yes.
they've got a lot of resources that they can point to as well. So there are lots of choices out there now. Pete, you've done some climbing, quite a bit of it over the years. What do you do for certifications or training, or just rely a lot on experience?
No, I did just the climber training with the ComTrain is what I did. I don't climb that much, and I'm just more of a consultant, super, inspection, that sort of thing. So, I don't need the OSHA gym pole training and all the rigging. There's rigging 1, 2, and 3 master rigger. There's a ton of those that are kind of required nowadays for a crew doing construction and that sort of thing.
And I think that's a good point, and it comes back to what we were talking about before. The training you require is going to be determined a lot by the scope of the work you're engaging in.
Yeah, exactly.
So so that's a good point. Now, Todd, RFS, do y'all have tower crews on under your employer? Or do you contract that out mostly?
No, it's all contracted. Yes.
Hmm. And I know we'll come to it in a few slides, but do you have like a checklist or requirements for a crew you hire, or again, is it determined by the scope of the job?
No, absolutely. It's you have to make sure go through qualifications and make sure they have a safety program in place and in the proper insurances. Um, and for example, like large cantilever towers with antennas on that, there's only a handful of crews in the country that are capable of doing that type of work, and so you have to use like Pete said, a specific crew for that work. If you're hanging an antenna on the side of a small tower, there's probably a local crew that can do the work for you, but we only have a handful of crews that are a vendor. It's more of a paper trail than anything, financial and safety things. But it takes time for a company to become a vendor.
Hmm. Hmm. All right, that was a good point. You'd mentioned talking and because so we wouldn't be right if we didn't have the occasional glamour shot. And Pete, you sent me this one. Thank you for that. I'm pretty sure that 3/4 of the audience can pick that tower out just from that picture right there. But the what was it? Somebody was telling me during repack, and it was one of the antenna manufacturers was saying that there's something like 15 crews qualified to work over 1,000 feet, and so the height of the tower, as well as the whether you're working a candelabra or a side mount, all those impact. Is that accurate, Pete?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of crews that can work on 200, 300, 400 footers, but you need different kinds of hoists and man baskets and all kinds of different training and stuff to get up above 1,000 feet.
Hmm. And I mean, so this one, for anybody who didn't know, this is Sutro out on the West Coast. And Pete, I know you've done a lot of work with them, and I know some you can talk about and some you can't. But if there's anything you could share, it'd be really cool.
Well, sure. Yeah, I was out there for a lot of the Todd, myself, running around doing testing, but for the repack, they hired me just to be on site for the planning and everything about the repack there. So, I spent 3 years there pretty much going back and forth. Um, I think we've got, I think there's 22 or 23 broadcast antennas on that structure.
It's a pile.
That's
Yep.
mains, auxiliaries, and third backups, and so there's a lot of it was a lot of work on that to get it transmitting.
And that brings us to a question that Jerry had asked, and I'll tie it into one Sean had asked in the advances. But so when you're working on a multi-user site like this, especially, I mean, specific absorption, RFR exposure is a big factor. So how do you coordinate power levels for determining figuring out who has to turn down, or if anybody does?
Oh yeah, we have a really good plan out there. We worked coordinate with a big engineering firm out there, and so and part of that repack was a new control system. So we have a control system there that we look to see where the guys are going to be working, and we can just switch everybody to the auxiliary antennas, and clear that space up for people to work. And we also require them to wear the portable RFR meter, and in case somebody switches back. But we also have lockouts for each station there as well. So once we get them switched, they can't. We can actually lock out any antenna there where they can't broadcast on that antenna until we clear it.
A
That's
lot
right.
of sites you do RF mapping also, so you know what the levels are at different scenarios and locations on the tower.
Yeah, we've had that one mapped as well, but Hammett and Edison out there.
Okay, and I know a lot of them, I mean, near field stuff is falls under, it's either OSHA or EPA, but when you're on the ground, they talk about it, but it's one of those when you're climbing through the aperture of a big FM, that can be an issue. So it's that's interesting. Now, talking about the climbing, one guy mentioned that the difference between falling after 40 feet and 500 feet is about the same end result. I think the hole gets a little deeper, the splat gets a little bigger, but that's about it. Todd, you were going to say something.
I'm sorry, pass me.
That's all right. Welcome to my world. Elaine was asking if you have situations like on a big tower like this where you'd have to coordinate with multiple tower companies. Might you have more than one different crews on at the same time?
Occasionally, that some of that has to be worked out between the two companies. Some companies just won't allow it. Others seem to be a little bit okay with it, but never have, two big construction things been going on. One crew might be doing something really small and
Yeah.
allow that. But if it's anything heavy, big rigging, only one company at a time, I would think would be normal.
Right.
That would be logical plan. And I know I encountered one scenario once in a southern state that will remain nameless where they were reinforcing a tower at the time the other crew showed up to mount the big antenna that the first crew was supposed to be reinforcing the tower to support.
It's a
And
bad combo.
and
Yeah.
that's just a terrible thing to overlap,
Right.
But yeah, so planning is really a big deal for this. It's not just something that you call somebody up and say, I want to do this. So question, getting specifically into tower work, best type of boots and gloves. I know for most of the stuff I use just the little spray on neoprene gloves because I don't need to work up high and worry about jamming fingers and stuff. But is there a preference?
I just leather gloves, I guess, for me. I
Yeah,
don't
leather
know.
gloves for me also, and just I've always been a Red Wing boot fan, so that's what I wear.
Now, my wife, when I was telling you earlier, when she's born and raised in Sheboygan, but when I met, she was living in Red Wing, Minnesota. So yep, I'll give you the shout out for the Red Wing boots right there.
I would say don't have knobbies on the bottom though. Just trekking mud around everywhere. I got yelled at by Jim and King for putting mud on his tower. He got pretty mad. So
Smooth boots are better.
they are, yeah.
Talking about PE and climate apparel and things like that. Sean had mentioned that once he had a tower guy show up wearing a metal mesh climbing suit for protection against RF. Is that effective? Thoughts? Seems to me
They
a bad
are.
weight.
Yeah,
Do they work?
they do.
Yeah, they do work. I was a little bit of a guinea pig back in the 80s when they were first coming out with those things. But yeah, no, they work well.
Okay. And this is, of course, I think in metal mesh, the first thing that comes to my mind, because I work with a lot of cast iron in the kitchen, is chainmail for cleaning stuff. But
Yeah,
I assume we're
No,
not talking chainmail here.
no, you have to
no.
get a suit manufactured by somebody, and they're not. It's a microscopic piece of metal.
It's
Wrapped
woven in. Yeah.
woven in
Okay.
there. You can't tell there's any metal in it.
All right. Well, there's
And
a good thing to.
you still have to know the RF levels because they only work up to a certain level, and up to certain levels without the hood, and then with the hood you can go a little hotter. So you need to follow the instructions.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, and one of the things we touched on it earlier, and we talked about in the preamble. One of the big deals these days, and if you're bringing a crew on site, whether it's on the tower or really doing anything, is liability and talking about insurance. And we'd had a little discussion, and Todd, you'd mentioned that y'all have pretty specific requirements, and again, sometimes depending on the site and the job.
Right. For example, the World Trade Center, that's a $25 billion policy to work there. You're right there in downtown Manhattan. So if something falls off and kills somebody or injures somebody, it's going to cost a lot. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anything less than 5 million for insurance requirements for a umbrella policy for somebody, but I would say 10 is probably the more common number these days for insurance requirement.
Yeah, I think that's correct. There might be 5 million just for some small inspectors or things like that still. For me, it's okay to have 5. That's what I carry, and that works for me generally, but not if I had to go to World Trade or to some other places that have a lot of exposure.
It's important that you get listed as additional insured if you're a station owner. That way you have a policy in place and you know the insurance is valid that they have. So keep track of that as a station when you employ a tower crew.
Yeah. And that comes back to, and we'll hit on it a little later again too, but somebody had asked about what if you're, well, first we got a bunch of similar questions. How to figure out if your tower, like, how is it? Red flags prior to allowing someone on your tower. And I'm assuming, especially if it's crew you haven't worked with before, that you're actually going to want to see the insurance certificate versus just them saying, yeah, we got insurance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, like Todd said, the key to that is just to make sure you require them to get your company additionally insured on their policy, so you have a copy of it that's got your name on it. Because if they just show up with a document, that's just a general document, it could be invalid. So having the additional insured is really important.
And that comes back to a good point. And we'd in the preamble we were having a little bit of a little bit of I guess, a discussion on liability. So theoretically, I'm assuming if the tower company's on the tower and something happens, that the liability belongs to them. But I'm equally sure in today's litigious society that if they don't have sufficient insurance to cover, that the balance is going to come back to the tower owner. And I'm sure it's situational, but would that be probably an accurate assessment?
Well, lawyers are, so they drag everybody in. So it's yeah, especially in the States. So um, yeah, it's not uncommon that depending on the severity of the accident or injury, they drag in a deep pocket. Whoever has most insurance is going to get hammered. I've even seen people that put the gravel on the road get named in the suit because they were on the site. So it's good to be covered. So
Hmm. And Jerry was asking on the RFR question, he was talking specifically about 2 to 3 occupant sites. Who gets to decide which guy is using the personal RFR monitor correctly? And I mean, now, speaking from our experience, like with the NARD alerts that we use for our field guys, there's not a whole lot of incorrect or correct. You put it on your belt, and if it goes off, you look for the number it's squawking at you.
right,
But
yeah, I didn't know that was open for discussion. Yeah, so
I
right,
mean,
they're very simple. Yeah.
yeah, it's turned on or it's not turned on. Um, so Joe is asking also about certifications over and above insurance. Do you look for training certifications? Pete, you'd mentioned that you had a certification level for safety training.
Yeah, just I forget what it's called, but the general climber 2 or something, so somebody who's got a lot of experience just to be able to climb, but not, I don't have all the other training, but yeah, everybody, that should be required for any tower owner or radio station owner should definitely be requiring all the crews to, have that training and get copies of their training cards as well.
And that's again something that I think you can come back to if you go to Nate's website. They do show a list of the various trainings. I don't think they offer the training specifically, but they can tell you what different certification levels are required for different projects. So it's been a pretty good resource too.
Yeah.
Let's see, the stuff's coming in on the online questions faster than I can keep up. So, anything we don't hit in the next half hour, I'll send you an email. Todd?
Back to the RFR question, the meter. There's one called the Radman, which I'm not a big fan of. It doesn't do spatial averaging, so you can get a chirp on it. The NARD alert is a lot better for use than the Radman. I think it probably costs more money, but you're going to get a more accurate number.
Yeah,
Now,
there's a new one out called it's European MVG, I think. Those are I think I like them better than the Nard alerts. Just
They're
less
big. Yeah.
false. Anyway, they work really well. And they only do averaging. It's a really nice meter.
okay. And one thing William mentioned about the Nard alert, and he's right, Nard alert does depend on the model and FM versus AM, et cetera. So you
Right.
definitely need the right model for the specific situation.
Yeah. E field or bad field, right? So.
Yeah.
So let's just run through, and Tom asked a really good or made a really good comment here, and he's basing it on his own experience. But so you're a station owner and you need to hire a tower crew for some project or another. What would be the process that you would follow, Pete? So you got to put an antenna up. Say you're swapping out an antenna, and you got to hire a tower crew. What's the process you go through? How to hire, what to check, what paperwork, etc.
Well, I mean, first off, if most people already have some regular crews, so use your regular crew, or find out what the scope of the work is and whether that crew is capable of doing that, or if they're not, then reach out to some other engineers to get some other names, get some other quotes to make sure they're qualified. Insurance.
You can talk to the antenna company too. I mean, they have a lot of experience with different crews also. So,
Yeah,
or people like Pete and myself, ask us.
Right,
Yeah.
great point on the manufacturer.
Right. And so Dan makes another good point here too. Check to make sure that they've got at least one, if not two, rescue certified climbers on the job, because that's something that your local fire department's probably not going to have the gear to get up 200 feet to pull somebody off a guy wire where they're dangling.
Yeah,
Well, that's part of your training though.
right.
When you get your climber cert, so that they should all be able to do that.
So here's another picture that Pete had sent in, and it looks like Jim Pole getting ready to hang some stuff on Sutro. And so the first thing Todd mentioned was the wrench. And Todd, you were talking about tying stuff down, and I like the comment about that being a toolbox. But that's
Well,
really another deal, because we had the conversation earlier about what to do if you're on site and you hear the word headache.
yeah, run for cover.
For cover and try to get skinny.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Minimize your footprint as much as humanly possible. But that is a good point, especially if and I mean, as was mentioned earlier, whether we're talking 50 feet or 400 feet, I'm not sure how long it takes to achieve terminal velocity, but a wrench coming down from a couple of 100 feet in the air is going to leave a pretty big hole in whatever it comes in contact with.
Right.
Yeah.
So that wrench obviously won't jump out of the toolbox there, but it's a good idea to have your tools secured to the lanyard so that if you do drop it, it's not going to go to the ground. So.
And so that brings up a really good point. Do you have, and again, this is me not having firsthand experience, so I don't know, but do you have like a hard hat area within a certain radius of a tower that's being worked on, or how do you maximize safety for the people on the ground like me that don't necessarily know any better?
There's definitely a hard hat area. At Sutro, it's anything within the fenced area, but most any other tower job site, if you come into the gate anywhere on the property and you got a crew up working, you need to be wearing a hard hat.
And there's a sign on the fence when the crew shows up on site that lists the issues about minute height and hard hat area and don't access unless you need to be here, and things of that nature. So pay attention to that signage.
Mhm. Now, I guess the other question I've got, well, twofold. So Ben wants to know how you even get a gin pole up there out on the arms. Do you just winch them straight up?
So, that depends on the crew. They'll put it together in pieces. Typically it might go up in two pieces. If it's a straight tower, you bring it, you hang it down. The top of the gym pole would be below when you get it mounted, and then you have your sliding track and everything, and that's hooked up to a different hoisting cable. And once it's all rigged up properly, you can just slide it up. It's too hard to explain in this short time we have.
Yeah, and it's one of those that I think it probably fascinates those of us from areas where towers tend to be 300 or 400 feet high when we see these big candelabras, and it's like, whoa, that's really cool. So one of the other things we got talking about very briefly in the preamble, uh, and I talk about this a lot when I'm doing any project, is checklists. And I mean, I have a checklist. I'll rephrase. My wife has a checklist for everything. I should have a checklist for everything. I tend not to be that person. But when you're working with stuff like this, checklists are a really good idea. And I know with tower climbing, there's a lot of talk about, I guess, pre-climb safety checks and things like that. Because when you're relying on that lanyard, the safety harness to keep you off the ground, you want to be sure it's working. So this was one of the advanced questions. What do you do? And I'm going to hit two questions here, but if your tower crew doesn't seem to be following the best practices for safety, yet you want to get the job done. And I mean, that's to me, that's almost an either or. Because if they're not following the best practices and you suggest that they do so otherwise, then your next step is pretty much to move them off the site. Am I wrong, or what would you do in that case?
Yeah, I would dismiss them. They're working for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm with Todd on that. I mean, it depends on the what they might not be doing. But if it's some gross negligence, or just not looking at anything, or if they're not doing their morning safety meetings and morning planning, which you should be privy to as since you hired them, that's a red flag there. You're just kind of waiting for an accident.
Yeah, it's a good idea to be on site during those meetings and discuss the RFR and shutdowns and exposure and safety. So be proactive, be a part of it, and try to catch those things before they become an issue, or point them out.
So safe to say your best bet when you bring them on, when you first contract them, it's a good idea to let them know that you'll expect to be part of the daily safety meeting. More, not necessarily just telling them there will be a daily safety meeting, but just that you want to be a part of it to set the expectation that it will be happening.
Right.
Okay, cool.
You should get a copy of their safety plan too ahead of time, as well as, we haven't talked about it, rigging plan, make sure that's been certified by a structural engineer, those type things.
So off the record, well, as much as anything that's being recorded is off the record, without naming any names or places, what are some of the scariest things you've seen in the present? And I mean, I'll start with this. I was putting an AM in at a site somewhere on this planet, and the tower crew, the transmitter, there's two transmitters. They'd come in two big 14-foot boxes. They took the boxes and bolted them together and made a little hotel, threw their sleeping bags in them so they could spend their per diem on Jack Daniels while they were on site. So, that's arguably one of those situations where I spent as much time as far as possible from the tower for the 3 days I was there. But what would your all-time scariest be? Pete?
Oh gosh, you're talking about an incident or just something that the crew? I don't know.
There's too many.
I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ain't come to mind, Todd?
No, but yeah, just going through my head. But it's a lot of things that were a bit scary, especially overseas, more so
Mhm.
than the U.S. I went to a site once that had it was tower and tree service, but they had no business being on a tower, you know. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, do your checks on the company and check around. So
Yeah, yeah. If they show up with the little 7-Eleven radios, that's a red flag.
Good to know. And it's
yeah, or
funny,
they
I had
or they take the tire off the truck and put a cat head on the wheel. You know,
Yeah,
that's another good one. So
that's
so
another red flag.
yeah,
so I saw that, and I will admit to having seen that in Arkansas, where they used the dually hub on the back wheel of the F-150 to get the guy up the tower, and it's like, yeah, I'm glad this is not my site or my relative on that thing.
Yeah,
right.
nobody should ever be riding the rope.
Right.
No.
So somebody in the audience is tower guy offered to do a free inspection for me once. He raced another climber up my tower. I made them both leave the site. And yeah, that's a good point. A tower is not a place for a competition.
No.
Let's see. I saw something else go by here. Admit nothing when it comes to telling stories about what you've seen or not seen. Uh, so I think my I guess scariest tower on the tower one. We had a site in another country. I was putting an AM in, and it was, and I told Todd this in leading up emails, but the the tower was it's about a quarter wave on a high frequency AM, so 200 odd feet. Far enough that falling off it would have been pretty terminal. And we discovered that the SWR problem we were having with the transmitter was because every single bolt holding the tower together, so all the mass junctions, all the bolts were backed off about a quarter of an inch. None of them have been tack welded or spot welded or even lock washered or held down anyway. And so every time the wind blew, the tower was kind of just doing this little shimmy in the wind, and the load was, of course, changing, and the transmitter was expressing displeasure. So the solution was to measure out the length, a quarter-inch copper cable, the length of the height of the tower, coil it up, and this young fella slung it over his shoulder. Now, I'm not sure what 200 less the top mast, so 175 feet, give or take, of copper cable weighs, but this young fella, smaller than me, drapes it over his shoulder and shinnies up the mast freehand, barefoot, and gets to the top, clamps it to the top of the first mast junction, below it, and then top and bottom of every mast junction, tightening all the bolts on the way down. And that was the solution. No safety gear whatsoever. And yeah, I said, how tall is this tower? And they said about 250 feet. And I got 275 feet away and said, when he's done, I'll get closer. But
Yeah.
so there's one example. And you made a really good point, Todd, that I think it's safe to say that the practices followed in different companies can vary widely.
Yep.
Let's see.
Very
Yeah,
slow. No ocean. A lot of countries.
Yeah. And William makes a good point too that it's important to find someone you trust because you don't know what they're doing a few hundred feet up, and ask for photos of everything. And that comes back to, I'm going to jump ahead a couple. So Nate does have a contractor evaluation checklist. Of course, anybody can put anything down for that stuff. So you still have to be there for the safety meetings. Somebody had asked earlier, it jumped ahead on me, but on the pre-climb safety, is that something that they do before, like in the office before they get to the site, or is it done on site every morning? How do you, how do safety meetings, how do those shake out?
That's on site every day. There's a checklist. You kind of go over your basic safety of this. Every site has different scenarios that you have to consider, overhead power lines and all those sorts of things. And, you know, the crew will talk about that, and then they'll talk about what they're doing for work that day, and then everybody signs it and checks it off. And if you're one of the engineers, you'll be able to sign off on that as well.
All right, so it's over and above safety, it's just sort of a refresher on the things they need to be aware of, and scope of the like basically a work scope review too, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay, cool. So that's a really good idea. And definitely, yeah, if you've got a tower crew on, then folks, that's something that you absolutely need to be part of. Um, One of the other things, and this meter, and we're jumping back to Sutro again, but I've never seen a wind speed meter before, so that was really fascinating to me. But 27 miles an hour, that's a pretty stiff breeze.
Yeah, it's getting up there. You know, you can work up there in those conditions. Just lifting items gets tricky at at at, at those, and those kind of wind speeds. Typically, that might be a bit much to be lifting. If it's something heavy, I think it's typically 0 to 15 is for heavy things.
And that brings us to one of the questions that Kenneth had asked in the advance. What weather conditions at the tower site will determine whether the crew will work to finish or call it off? And so if you're doing a hoist, obviously wind speed. I know that I've run into situations where obviously weather condition, I mean lightning in the area type things. How do you make the call on stuff like that?
A lot of variables.
Yeah, but the lightning is a big deal, and I've been, when I was younger working, you know, I got hit secondarily through holding onto the guy wire, and it's not a pleasant experience. So yeah, if you got lightning in the area, you need to just stay clear of the tower.
Yeah. Now, is that something, and again, I'm showing my ignorance here, but is this something where they have somebody on the ground kind of monitoring weather patterns or coverage over and above the guys on the tower who are obviously going to be focused on what they're doing and not necessarily looking at a cloud coming down the sky?
You see, you're looking pretty close when you're up there, so you can see it coming from the distance or sparking. Yeah,
Okay.
but you
So
can look at the weather every day. I mean, you're like a pilot. You got to look at the weather a lot, you know. So
Mhm.
Exactly.
So yeah, so wind, lightning. Now I've run into, of course, a good chunk of my territory and where I live these days. And our local tower, we've canceled 2 climbs in the past couple of years because of ice. It's obviously you can't climb safely on something if there's an inch of ice covering every surface. Uh, so are there situations where a crew would climb in snow and ice and stuff like that? As I know I wouldn't, but then again, I've already determined that I belong on the ground.
I've climbed icy
same
stuff.
here. Yeah, yeah.
The smooth ice is, you know, that's a difficult challenge. You know, you definitely need all your safety equipment, and you're using it as designed. You know, but the frosty
Slow,
stuff, not too bad.
slower. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to climb up through the frost with the whole tower where it did like jam our heads up in there and wiggle around to get rid of the frost to get up the ladder. But it was a short tower, mountaintop.
Like I say, after 20 feet, it hurts a lot. So I give you all the credit for that. Um, One of the things we get talking about a lot, and Pete, you sent me these ones, and Todd, I know y'all have done some stuff on it too, but TDRs are, I would argue one of the coolest devices ever when it comes to figuring out where a problem is. And Todd, you'd mentioned that on a multi-user site that it can be an issue though.
Well, yeah, your instrument, you've got, if you have a lot of ingress coming down the line from the antenna, then you really can't just use a simple instrument. Like Pete and I have an amplifier, and so we can overcome the ingress and get a measurement. You also have to worry about damaging the analyzer. I've been to sites where I've had, a couple watts coming back down the line, and that would definitely blow the port on your analyzer out.
Mhm.
So you gotta know what you're plugging into before you plug in.
And I was going to say, I mean, my first mind was, well, you throw a circulator on it, but you're trying to look at the signal coming back specifically, so that wouldn't do you any good.
No,
Um,
you'd be looking at the load.
yeah. So you do. I assume that you can pad it down somewhat if you've got a resistive attenuation, but that's a good thing to know. So, and I expect it'll be determined like one TDR to another. The amount of I guess input power they'll tolerate will vary from one to another.
Yeah, most of them are rated for like up to plus 27 dBm, half a watt. But the source power is only like 0 dBm or plus 5 dBm.
Hmm.
Like the Field Fox from Keysight has got a interference rejection algorithm that runs on it. So I've had plus 20 coming back down the line at me and still been able to make a measurement, which is pretty incredible.
Hmm. Okay. Little side note, Tom had asked in the questions, maintenance items on towers. What are the most overlooked things like anchor points, guy wires? What's the thing that engineers, in your experience, will tend not to pay as much attention to as maybe they should? And I know for me, one of the things that comes to mind is on AMs with series fed AMs with a base insulator. You've got typically a weep hole in the base insulator to let condensation, let moisture out. And if that gets plugged, then they'll fill with water. And now it's not an insulator; it's basically a capacitor.
Right.
Right.
So is there anything else that comes to mind? Things that probably should get a little more care and attention than they do get?
Corrosion control is, always there. Elevator maintenance is a biggie for the big
Yeah.
tower.
Going to say climbing 2,000 feet doesn't sound like a lot of fun if there's an elevator sitting there.
No.
No, and it's common that they're not maintained well.
Hmm.
Yeah. Costs a lot
Now,
to maintain, right? So
They do, but it does save money over time as long as you can get it maintained properly.
right.
right.
And I mean, I've run, again, looking at my AM background, but a lot of guy wire insulators, the little compression insulators. You see a lot that are cracked or carbon tracked.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, that's something I know a lot of it. And it was one of the requests or questions was how are drones helping tower crews? And in a lot of ways, I mean, that's one of the ways you can kind of inspect the work, isn't it? Have you either used drones for stuff like that? I know at 2,000 feet, you're not going to typically be doing that.
I've seen a lot of people do that, and yeah, that's pretty impressive how much resolution you can have and what you can see. And there's one guy doing infrared surveys, also looking at the lines. Um, yeah, it's not a bad thing. Anything you can do to put eyes on it is a good thing. Uh, Back to your maintenance point, transmission line hangers, that's a big one, especially with the flex cables, like the cheaper butterfly clips and things like that will come loose, and uh, poor installation where they don't use the hoisting grip to hold the cable, they use the cable clamps to hold the cable. So keep an eye on that. Your spring hangers, a lot of times the gates come loose. So you want to look for that springs popping or so yeah, transmission line definitely a big one to keep an eye on.
I
I'll jump in on that. Just that's the most, that's where the signal's going. But the other thing is to make sure you got a good dehydrator or a nitrogen maker or nitrogen. And, most burnouts invariably are due to they didn't keep pressure on the line for some reason when they had a leak.
mhm. And then, yeah, moisture gets in. And I mean, you see on Facebook, you'll see at least one video a year with somebody drilling a 1/8 or 1/4 inch hole in the low point of a piece of air line and watching the little stream of water come pouring out. One of the things that, and Todd hit a good point with the clips and the retainers, the snap hangers and all that. I coming through again, it's either Wisconsin or Michigan, can't remember now, but drove by a cell tower and had to turn around and drive back because they'd had some straight line winds come through and a bunch of the hangers had either opened or broken. And like a lot of cell towers, you'll have almost a wall of coax going up one face. And one entire wall was bowed out about 6 feet from the tower, making basically a sail. And it was impressive. That warranted a quick call to the local AT&T rep to say, hey, send him a picture. And he said, uh-oh, we'll have somebody there now.
Yeah.
So, but another one that comes to mind, and this is one I see a lot, is especially as you see translators get added on or stations go to multi-use and they put a couple of towers on and cable, I guess, dressing, for lack of a better word. I mean, I've seen towers with like 20, 30 cables going up them and spread over a space of about 10 to 15 feet. So you're creating a massive wind load. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, the neater it is, the easier it is both to maintain and for longevity, in my mind. But am I just blowing smoke, or is that accurate?
Yeah, it's important to dress things properly and keep things tucked in into a corner where they reduce wind load. Things on the face obviously is a bad place to be. So yeah.
There's a lot of options now with hangers and stuff where they'll where you can mount them all in a circle on a steel hanger and the clips go into that. So make use of all of the stuff that's out there.
Okay. And got another comment here. Had a tower crew use a drone with thermal to sweep the tower to take temperature readings to narrow down which bay they were having a problem with. And
Right.
comes back to, these are the sweeps that you'd sent, Pete, but you can tell a lot from just what you're able to do on the ground almost these days.
Yeah, we can get real close. I'm for all technology in these things. So yeah, I mean, if you can't find it and you've got availability to have somebody with a drone with a thermal thing and they can look at it while it's on the air, then that's a useful thing. But typically we get there pretty quick without having to resort to those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's one of them. It's like I told somebody, the old ways work, or they wouldn't still be the ways that we use in a lot of cases. So the technology can help, but it doesn't necessarily replace getting there and laying eyes and hands on things
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's just a lot of experience sitting behind the box and working on the tower really makes a big difference to solving
Yeah.
the problem quickly.
Uh,
Just
And that ties into the question that Kenneth threw in here. Is it a good practice to put like a physical inspection by a tower crew into your budget every couple of years? Is it worth having them climb the tower and take a look?
Absolutely.
I think most insurance companies require that. So yes, you absolutely should be doing it typically once a year. Should be doing it to things go wrong in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, sweeping the line, the antenna, checking their dehydrator out. These are all important things to consider. If you're a one station 5 kilowatt FM, I don't know, you're not going to burn up your line. You're not pushing it. But if your transmission line's running at 80% of its rating, then yeah, I think once a year is not a bad idea to keep an eye on things. If you had a big storm come through, if you see a change in your reservoir, these are good reasons to take a look at things and catch it before it causes a burnout. So
Yeah, and that's a good point too, especially if you've got, well, no, it doesn't, tube solid state doesn't make a big difference. But a lot of times, depending on the phase angle of the reflected power, your reflected power meter may not change. So your Vismar may not change, but you might see a shift in volts and current. And so a lot of folks, especially with some of the older rigs, the answer has always been, oh, something's changed, and they'll go in and tune out the loading and tuning in the final to match it to the new load.
right,
But really, at that point, you should be figuring out why it changed to
what?
begin with.
Yeah, what changed and why? Right.
Yeah. And I mean, occasionally you'll get like the subtle changes as tubes age or whatever on a tube rig, but you're going to be
Right.
less inclined to have that sort of thing when when you're keeping a conscious eye on it on a regular basis. Joe asks here, he said he had a tower crew insist on not reusing mounting hardware, which had been in service a number of years. How critical is it to not reuse mounting hardware? Um, and so, what's best practice there? Do you replace the hardware every couple of years if you're moving something? Obviously, if it's just sitting there and not doing anything, you're going to leave it alone, I assume, unless it looks bad. But what are your thoughts on that, Peter? Like if you're moving a cable for whatever reason, would you use new mounting hardware?
Sorry, I got distracted from my family here, but ask me quickly, what was that again?
Sure. So mounting hardware, we were talking about a crew that they were doing some work, moving some stuff, were replacing line and wouldn't reuse the existing mounting hardware. They insisted on new. Best practice, yes?
Yeah, I think that's the best practice. Absolutely.
All right. Let's see here. Boy, I got people writing me books in the background here, huh? Not uncommon for the transmission line to create more wind load than the antenna or other antenna they were concerned was going to create, but they were so hung up on the wind load spec they totally ignored the transmission line. And that is a good point, though, because when you are adding anything to a tower, whether it's a new antenna, whether it's putting radomes on an existing antenna, whether you're running another cable, maybe you're going from 1/2 inch to 7/8, all of that does impact the weight and the wind load, correct?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
should do a structural anytime you make a change to the tower, you should do a structural analysis.
Yeah. And I mean, I know like in my infinite spare time, I help out. I say help out. I don't do much of the work. I just sort of take the credit on webinars. But we've got a little 1 kilowatt, and we're in the process of swapping out an old antenna to a new antenna. And even though the new antenna is lighter, they're definitely they're insisting on a structural analysis because it's not just the weight; it's also surface area, wind load, the whole bunch of factors.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's
So,
kind of required to, if you're changing anything, you need to get it looked at by an engineer.
so
It's
Kenneth
it,
has asked a question, and we're up against the top of the hour. So Kenneth, I'm going to try to address this, and if I mess it up, I'm going to get you to hit the hand wavy icon and clarify for me. But he mentions that as a station owner near the Atlantic Ocean, he's not finding many insurers will insure the antenna, and it's really limiting when looking for insurers. Are there insurance companies that specify or that specialize in like broadcast antenna insurance or things like that?
I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it. This specific, typically it's the whole tower, the site, and everything mounted to it.
I mean,
So,
if you're on, I mean, we have antennas in severe, crust environments, and yeah, it may not last as long as sitting in the current cornfield in Iowa, but it's just the price of where business where you're at. But I mean, if you're keep buying the same antenna, having the same issues, I'd look at another manufacturer.
Yeah. So getting back to trying to find an insurance company to insure it, I mean, I guess, yeah. Where would you go to look for something like that? That might be beyond my ability to Google. Would you start with Lloyd's of London and see who they recommend, and I just picked Lloyd's because they seem to be the ones who will insure just about anything.
That's who I'm insured with. Yeah. But
There, see, case in
uh,
point.
for equipment though, I really don't know where you'd go look for that. I would assume it's a general policy you have on your site. So,
Mhm. So as I said, we are at the top of the hour. We're going to run 10 or 15 minutes late because, well, we always do, and I'd hate to stop, hate to break a perfect record now. But Pete, just you'd sent me these waveforms, and just your one synopsis. What's arguably, and I mean, I of course keep focusing on the TDR, but what's your favorite, I guess, measurement? What's the thing that tends to tell you the most when you're doing antenna work?
I don't think there's any one tells you the most. They all work in conjunction to sort of give you an overall view. The suite gives you the overall VSWR, your TDR, your in channel or 5 megahertz bandwidth or something. TDR kind of, it can tell you where the reflections might be. So if you've got big bump in the middle of the transmission line, it's real obvious you've got some issue there. And then you got the wideband TDRs that'll really look at each bullet individually and tell you whether you have some wear in the line or one's wiggling around. You can know that that's something that needs to be addressed pretty quick.
Yeah, and I can point to a situation going back a little over, it's about 25 years ago, I guess, maybe a little longer, where I was putting had a transmitter in and they'd had a combiner flame out. And so we went up with a replacement combiner and I started looking and it was two transmitters combined. So the one filter had carbon in it. So then when I brought it up, the other transmitter started acting a little flaky. And so I get a flashlight in and I can see where it looked like some carbon and bring it up in a dark room and I can see the blue flame and I'd say, okay, yep. So at that point, the engineering guy said, yeah, no, that insulator's a little underrated. We'll get you a new one. So they get the new insulators out. We swap them in the field, get everything all tuned back up. And we go to bring it up again and we get to power and now we're getting SWR alarms, something after the filter. And that's when they said something within a half wavelength or on a half wavelength multiple is probably arcing. So being somewhat, I guess, I don't know what the right word is, limited in my test equipment at the time, I grabbed a tape measure, measured out half a wavelength, and then just rotated it end over end down the transmission line and ended up exactly at the input connection to the branch combiner, which was made by a company who will remain nameless, and pulled that off, and this big old pile of soot fell out. So, like you say, having a TDR, just knowing the distance to something can be a really big deal. And if you've got 1,000 feet of line and it's showing a problem at 500 feet, that's where you start to look for the bullet hole if you're not holding pressure, as an example. Now,
right.
Yeah.
now we
Not,
do have
not supposed to
gratuitous.
not supposed to let the black stuff out of there.
That's what they say. So
Yeah.
gratuitous selfie time. Um, Todd, that's you, isn't it?
It is, yes.
There you go.
And cold.
Now, yeah, I'm going to say well insulated. So One World Trade, and I see a lot of emphasis is being put on. You'd mentioned earlier tying down tools, and everybody's well hitched off. Um, Is there any thought, sort of, I guess, closing thoughts as we near the end, the things that folks should pay attention to when they are hiring climbers? Obviously, somebody that's going to free climb up 250 feet to swap a light bulb is probably not the guy you want swapping the light bulb.
No, not from a liability standpoint. You want your crew to be safe and have a good references. You should review their safety plan and talk to them. If you have questions, bring it up. Well, it's that it you're working together, right?
Hmm. And Pete, I know you work mostly with big projects, but say the little guy in a cornfield on a 250-foot stick, hiring somebody to swap the light bulb, what requirements would you put on, like just a simple little job like that?
Oh, just he needs to have the regular climbing certification and, and have the correct insurance that your company requires. Typically a $5 million umbrella for something like that.
And Kenneth makes a good point too, that if you're on a brokered tower, like one that's owned by one of the bigger groups, then they will typically have the tower crew, their list of preferred tower crews or permitted tower crews that already have the certifications and insurance that they need. So
Right. Yeah.
that's a good point too.
Yep.
So let's see, we're looking at it, and you made the point earlier on when we were doing the quick pre-run too, that even here you've got your spectrum analyzer tied down.
Yeah, network analyzer. Yep,
Sorry, yes.
it's tethered. Well, it does both actually, Jeff. But yeah, so it's good to keep everything safe up there. Uh, yeah, so we were testing that antenna. You can see me in the orange up there, looking down.
And yeah, when I saved this one to put it in the slide deck, I think I titled it "No Dropsies."
Right,
But
right.
But yeah, I mean that and that comes back to the point we were making earlier. Whether you, yeah, Curtis says it sucks to climb back down to get the thing you drop. Well, and especially if the thing you dropped landed on the hood of your truck, because then you'll be picking it out of the engine block. But but yeah, it makes a really good point that whether you're 50 feet up or 500 feet up, a a tool's going to hit a pretty high velocity before it hits the ground. So Jerry wants to know how you tether a screwdriver.
They make liners for that.
They do. They're not bad. They make a lot of really, really good stuff now. It's really small and easy to use. So it's all out there nowadays.
Oh, there you go. So good thing to be aware of there as well. And more gratuitous stuff. This was almost so we got we did the West Coast in the clouds early on with Sutro. So now we're doing the East Coast in the clouds, looking down from One World Trade. But one of the points that I wanted to bring up with this one was, and you showed the picture of the peregrine falcon that had been kind of dogging you while you were on the tower. Um, how do you deal with the situations where you run into like an osprey nest on a tower?
Usually, it's best to contact the like DFO and find out from them what's required, um, uh, or whatever you call it in your state, I guess, uh, to know if you're able to work or not. I mean, if they're nesting, typically you're not allowed to go anywhere near them. I've seen them allow you to climb up there and go inspect the nest or something, but that nowadays you probably just buzz a drone up there and look in the nest.
Yeah.
But
And,
it's some big fines though if you disturb a nest.
and that was kind of the point too. Definitely, it's going to vary state to state, country to country, but you do need to I think if you, especially in a nesting situation, you do need to kind of reach out to the whatever local authority would be in charge of that sort of thing.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, up here it's either DNR, natural resources, or fisheries and oceans, depending on the creature.
Right.
So, Pete, any comments on that? Is that
Yeah,
something
no,
that?
in Texas, that would just be your Parks and Wildlife Department. They'll know exactly what to do. But yeah, the
I
main
see.
thing is to contact them and let them.
Yeah, and that's I think the probably the most critical thing, folks. If you're
They'll.
uh, Pete's starting to
Still there?
hiccup out on us. Yep, no, you dropped out a bit, but hey, you made it all the way to the end, so we did
Okay.
good.
Am I
So
back now?
you're sort of back.
Still there?
Yep.
Okay.
So on that note, folks, this webinar, as with all of our webinars, will be archived, and we'll throw the request out that you know, ideally and typically, I think we request. I don't think I've ever seen anybody grabbing a screenshot. I mean, you can grab a screenshot of me all day long. I'm used to it. But if you are going to put any of the other pictures out, reach out to either Todd or Pete to get permission, or reach out to me to get contact information. You know, because obviously that's not something that we typically share on a really wide basis. We'll be able to, I think we've got a Waves newsletter coming out. I always say we got one coming out shortly. I don't know when the next Wave's coming out. They rightly so don't want to let me have that kind of control. It'd be a bad thing. YouTube, you can find a lot of stuff on our YouTube channel, including customer service videos, all kinds of online info, broadcasters desktop resource. Barry does a lot of work there. Facebook group for everything and everything else. Broadcastengineering.info, engineering website put together by engineers for engineers. On that note, I just want to say thank you to Pete Eckmann for spending so much time with us today, and Todd Loney for both as well.
Glad to appreciate it. Yeah.
So,
All right.
folks, on that note, I want to thank you all for hanging around with us for the last hour and 15 minutes. By all means, reach out if we can answer any questions. And next week, we are talking about AM towers. So near and dear to my heart, we should have a lot of fun with that. On that note, we'll talk to you all later. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.